Hello everyone. Deleuze versus Foucault on the institution of the school. What a foreboding title. Now one might assume that Deleuze and Foucault and all the other so-called postmodernists or post-structuralists, etc., they're all but the same. They can all be lumped in together. They hate the West and they want to tear down Western civilization, etc., etc. And that's, of course, as cartoonish as it gets, so we don't even have to worry about that. In fact, there are quite stark differences between Deleuze and Foucault when it comes to the question of school. Now, it might be a bit of an oversimplification when it comes to Foucault, but overall, I think it's fair to say that Foucault is a sort of libertarian. He's, in any event, an anti-institutionalist thinker. For Foucault, ultimately, society, mass society, always tends towards suppression and oppression, outright oppression, of course, and any sort of institutionalization, including of the mad, the mentally insane, is ultimately just a repressive act by the state against the individual, which of course also doesn't exist. Now, one might think that Deleuze is similar, but that perhaps we should just get rid of schools, etc., and let the individual be and roam freely. But Deleuze and also Lacan are quite different. School, and we're talking now about elementary school and then what Americans might refer to as high school, what we in Europe refer to as the Lyceum or the Lycée or the Gymnasium, the higher forms of school. They are ultimately, for Foucault, institutionalized oppression. And they traumatize the individual in a way that is ultimately unforgivable. They are part of the panopticon, and hence they should be dismantled. And there's a certain anti-institutional, or as I said, at least proto-libertarian ideology here at work. But if you think about it in our time, in this, you're watching this on YouTube, you are perhaps looking for something on Deleuze and Foucault. But what you might also be looking for is some sort of an instant gratification. So you want to understand something instantly. And I mean, it's no surprise that people like Peter Thiel, who is a hardcore libertarian turned pseudo-Christian, you could also, why Thiel was one of the first investors of Facebook, together, of course, with In-Q-Tel, look that up. No coincidences here. And Facebook, of course, is the algorithm that helped rewire our brains to a certain extent towards instant gratification, which is, think about it, a stroking of the ego. It allows for the ego to be narcissistic. And if you get rid of school, which is the libertarian fever dream, be they left or right-wing libertarians, that, of course, would mean that the ego, the I, in the Freudian sense, never has to suffer any trauma. And trauma can be beneficial. I'm not talking about severe physical or psychological trauma, but I'm referring to the kind of trauma that puts the ego in its place, the necessary ego death that has to occur for a person to grow. And that can and does happen in school. And hence also why there can be, if you think back to your own time in school, if you went to a good school, by good school, it's not any kind of dog whistle. I mean a school that deserves the name of a school. It doesn't have to be good in terms of the ranking, but a school is good if it gives you an orientation in life and helps you find a ground to stand on. And if you had one good teacher, one real teacher, let's say, this one light, then you can count yourself lucky, I should say. And the maestro, the great teacher, is in a sense only possible in a very rigid environment. Similar for the university. Bit different for the university. We're just talking about school here for now. Even though I'll get to a story by Deleuze in a second where he talks about Sartre as his teacher and what Sartre meant to him at the Sorbonne. Now again, to oversimplify Foucault, Foucault would be against any sort of institutionalized school, or Foucauldianism ultimately would argue for that in a proto-libertarian fashion. Why? Because it means that it could inflict any kind of trauma on the individual, etc. And the individual, the ego, must not be restricted. And for Deleuze, however, the story is quite different. Now, Deleuze has this notion in difference of repetition that one should, of course, follow the master, the teacher, to a certain extent, but also be able not just to do it like the teacher or the master, the maestro, but also be able to do it with the teacher, so that the student is actually beginning to generate something unique and of their own. So you're not just copying or imitating, you are doing something with and along. And in so doing, you're already not necessarily moving past the teacher or the master, but you're generating something new entirely. And that would be part of proper formation, Bildung, if you like. That forms part of it. Now, a teacher, of course, has to be capable of facilitating that, of generating the space for that. But it needs and requires, I think Lacan and Deleuze would be in agreement here, the rigidity of school as well. So it needs, in a sense, the darkness of the institution of the school, the rigidity of it, for that one light to shine. And at the same time, though, not just for that one light, but also the trauma, that healthy, beneficial trauma of rigid school is necessary just to form the ego well. The ego needs to die, in a sense, for it to find a hold also. If not, then again, we come back to the ego just searching for instant gratification. So let me just perhaps now get to this story from that Deleuze recounts about Sartre, and I'm, if you forgive, I'm translating here now myself. We were lucky that there was Sartre, because Sartre was our outside. He functioned really like a breath of fresh air, let's say. Between all the possibilities inside or off the Sorbonne, there was him. He was the unique combination that gave us the force or the strength to support our new reorientation, you see? And it was Sartre who always was like this. He was not a model. It's very important that he says it's not a model. Because again, a model, I mean, obviously not not a fashion model, but a scientific model. So it's not something that can be just randomly applied. It's Sartre, and just Sartre. Sartre is unique, not a model that can be reapplied anywhere as the Procrustes bed. He was not a method or an example, but he was pure air or fresh air. And in this way, when he came from Café Flore, he was an intellectual who changed the situation of the intellect. there was too much method, too much imitation, too much commentary, too much interpretation, except for when it came to Sartre. So Sartre was able to, in some sense, go along and play along with the form, the rigidity of the University of the Sorbonne, but at the same time was able to break free from that form. But not in a sense that he broke down the form, but in a sense almost reinforced it, but outside of it. So it's creativity, you could say, is generated at the boundaries, at the edge, stepping over the edge to a certain extent, perhaps sometimes also, of course, as well. But always appreciating the necessity for strictness. And for also that there are things that are taboo. If you think about, what is it where we are in terms of late stage neoliberalism? There is perhaps still in polite society, but also perhaps one or two taboos left, let's say. Oversimplifying matters again. But are we genuinely in a more creative time? No, we're in a dumber time, dumber than ever. People trusting AI over their own thoughts is just a sign of that, basically, and nothing else. So the idea that liberation for the sake of liberation could lead to genuine freedom is ultimately has proven itself to be false. So it's from rigidity, from almost like from that intense rigidity that an order, that creativity can arise. But what we have is fully liberated, taboo-less individualism, but at the same time, hyper-conformism, hyper-conformity across the quote-unquote sexual spectrum, etc. I mean, there's nothing more corporate than that, is there? So, in a sense, Foucault turns out to be, as I've said in another video, where critiquing Foucault's critique of power, which you can find here on the channel, Foucault turns out to be the regime stooge, really. Sort of a regime apologist. Thank you.